Hello. Mm. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello, Adria. Can you hear me? Hello, Ira. Cool. Yeah. Hello. Okay. So I think we'll start because we are already 2 minutes after 5. Yeah. Hello. Okay. So good evening, and today we'll have an introduction to two methods of sharing your code and the data analysis. So it's not much to do with data analysis per se, but about sharing it with others. Yeah, so we'll try to see two methods. One will be R Markdown, which we will get through today, and then hopefully we can also have a little bit of start on R Shiny, whereas the next session will be completely focused on that. Yeah. And so just a few course organization as always. The GitHub page and the agenda. So just something to add. So now we also implemented a cloud-based R Studio. So if you are having any problems with installing packages, then you can always use this facility. The thing is that it works well and it's free of cost. And you can also, once you install your packages here, then you don't need to worry about it. All the new packages should be installed nicely. However, I would recommend that you also try to run RStudio and all the packages on your computer, because if you do not have an internet access, then most possibly the cloud will not work. And also, I think they are going to make it a paid service in future. Right now, it's free of cost, but yeah. But for right now, for this course, I think this is a good substitute if you're having any problems with installing any packages. So all the packages, including the packages for exercise, are already installed there. So you do not have to do any kind of installation. All the files are also present in the project, in the folders of the project. So you need to do nothing about anything. Yeah. So you can directly go and try it out there. And also on the GitHub site, so in the folder called cheat sheet, we have uploaded cheat sheets for all the packages that we looked at. I mean, we did not make the cheat sheets, of course. These most of the cheat sheets are made by RStudio or by other users of R. And so essentially, these cheat sheets are a quick reference manuals, and they are really handy because you can look at all the at least most of the important functions that come in a package, and you can see what they do and how to run them. They give you handy guidelines on how to use the package, what the package can do. So these come in really handy, and most of them are 1 or 2 pages. So if you want, you can even get yourself a printout and just keep them with you. They're updated regularly, so you should just keep a checkout on the RStudio website. If one of them gets updated, then maybe you would like to have a new one. Yeah. So we'll start with our main goal today, which is to look at R Markdown. And the main aim of this R Markdown is so as to let you make nice reports of your data analysis. And these reports are either HTML or PDF. Technically, you can also make directly Word documents, but it runs the best in HTML, and we'll focus on HTML today. So you can make an HTML site, an HTML page, or multiple pages, and then you can share the HTML pages with your collaborators or other people. However, these HTML pages are static, so essentially the code cannot be changed. Yeah. Mm. But they give you a nice way for sharing your data, and they are reproducible. And the reason why they are reproducible is because every time you make a new R Markdown sheet, so the HTML page, the whole code runs again. So it's difficult to, although I mean it's not impossible, it's difficult to kind of screw around with it, because it's going to run the code again, and whatever is the output of the code will go on to the HTML file. Yeah, so it's also reproducible. So we'll get started with this. So why, first of all, why do we need a markdown, or what essentially is a markdown? Where did it come from? I mean, R Markdown is the usage of Markdown in R, but it's not something specific to R. For example, LaTeX. So I don't know if any of you use LaTeX to write your papers or your thesis, but LaTeX is an example of Markdown. And what are all these markdowns? So you have essentially two kind of documents. So two ways in which some kind of text can be stored. So one of them is just a simple txt files, right? So in which there is only text and there is no formatting, right? So you cannot, for example, if you use Notepad, which is the most basic text editor in Windows, then you cannot really make something bold. You cannot make anything italicized, right? It's just a simple text file. So for example, a FASTA file, it's a simple text file, right? It doesn't have any kind of formatting. The advantage of this is that they are universal, right? So any kind of text editor can open it, so you do not need a special software. But on the other hand, you also have things like Microsoft Office, right, in which you can make documents with text, but they can be formatted in any way that you want, right? So you can have bold, italics, underline, highlighted, anything, any way that you want, right? So this is text with formatting. But the disadvantage being that if you try to open a Word document in a normal text editor, so this is trying to open this exact file in a simple Word text editor, and this is what you see, right? So it's not universal, right? So you need some special software to open it. And I mean, like for example, you can also use LibreOffice to open Word documents, but essentially there is an underlying API which is not universal, right? And this kind of text is not human readable, right? So you need some special software to make sense of what all is going on, and only then does it become human readable. So the goal of Markdown, or in general, not R Markdown, just Markdown, was to not just have plain text editor that also allows formatting, but to have this in a human readable format. And this was an important thing. And by human readable, what it means is that not just that the text and the final product should be human readable. I mean, that's the minimum you need, right? That your final product is readable by human, and the text within it is readable. But also the information about formatting is to some capacity readable by a human. So we'll see how this works. But essentially, all the elements should be very accessible, and they should be universal. And this was the whole idea, or the whole inspiration behind having Markdown. And where does this actually word come from? So the word Markdown originally comes from the concept of marking down. And this was a practice in olden times when people used to write books or magazines or any sort of things. They would send their text to the editors, and these would be either proofreading editors or copy editors, and these editors would then make marks onto the text, given by the person who wrote it, given by the writer, and this kind of marks will symbolize a sort of formatting. So what kind of formatting would accompany a text? These marks were made by copy editor, and because they were making marks, that's why the word marking down came, and the markdown word comes from there, right? So here you can make out that on the left hand side you have the text and the formatting information, and to a large extent this is human readable, right? So the information of formatting accompanies the text, and to some extent you can make sense of what is happening. And when you will have the final product, then of course it will have the text with the formatting, right? And this is the whole inspiration about R Markdown. So for example, all of the presentations, these kind of presentations are made in Markdown. So this was the final output on your left hand side, right? You see a header, like a text which is bigger, and then you see some other text with a little bit of bold. Then you see lists, so point 1, point 2, and then sub list, so list within list. And this is how it looks in Markdown. Yeah. So you have your title, so you write something, and then if in the next line you put a lot of equal to signs, then it becomes a title, right? So this is the formatting information for the text. So you have a text document which has the information on the text plus the formatting information together, and all of this is more or less human readable, right? You can read the right hand side as well as the left hand side, which is the final product. And the Markdown, let's say the Markdown software takes you from one place to another, right? So it will make sense of all of this formatting information and then use it to make the final product. Yeah. So for example, a bold text in Markdown is symbolized by 2 stars here. If you put a single star, then you get italics and so on and so on. But we'll go through them, right? So this is the whole concept of what it means to have a Markdown thing. A plain text file with your information of the text plus formatting, human readable, which can be converted into a final product. Just to add one more thing, there are only a few kinds of formatting which Markdown uses or supports, right? So you cannot really make like all kinds of formatting changes. Only what Markdown supports, it's possible. But with R Markdown, it sort of takes it one step further in a way that you can use Markdown to write your comments, to write information. Plus, you can add your R code in it. And this R code is then executed when you run the Markdown software. So it's called knit. So when you knit a Markdown, so knitting means to convert what is here, so what is on this side, to the final product. That is what is called knitting. So when you knit, the R code which you have included in the Markdown gets executed, and any output related to R code also gets added to the output. So the output could be HTML or PDF. And the advantage of this is because until now we were writing R code in R files, so .r files. And so you would have your code here, and then you would make plots. These plots you could save. But the thing is, if you want to share your code and analysis with somebody, then you would have to send your .r file, and along with it, whatever images or analysis you have made, normally you would put them in PowerPoint or just send them as images, but they are sort of disconnected with each other, right? It's not very neat. It's not very simple to read and all that kind of thing. So R Markdown takes care of it, right? So as I said, there is only a limited amount of formatting. So in the preparation for today's session, we asked you to download this R Markdown cheat sheet, which also has the reference. So if you have not done so, the information for the link for the preparation is in the is underneath the video on YouTube, so you can go and see. You can go there and download the reference sheet. I think it would be helpful to have that, and also just one image file, just because then we can use this to know how to put an image file in our Markdown. And just when you have this file, just save it on a place where you can locate it on your computer. Yeah. So it would be good that if you have these two things, right? So we'll start with the first R Markdown sheet example. So you can start your R Markdown by going to File, then New File, and then instead of selecting R Script, which is what we were doing until now, select R Markdown, and this will start your first Markdown file, right? So let's do that. So I'll also do it alongside. Right? And so it will ask you, when you do that, it will ask you whether you want to make a document, presentation, shiny, or from a template. We'll make a document. And also just choose your default output format as HTML. Yeah, because for PDF and Word, you need some more packages to be installed. But with HTML, you can always go back, right? And the title, you can just give anything. So first, Markdown, it doesn't matter what your title wants to, what title has to be. Right? So once you have it, it will make a small little file, your R Markdown file, and this already has a little bit of code in it and a little bit of R Markdown text in it. It's just to get you started. Yeah. Also save this file and try to save it in a location where your image is accessible. So the image that we want to use for this session. And when you save this file, you will see that it has an extension of .rmd, and that's just a short form for R Markdown, right? So R Markdown by itself, you can see that it's actually just a simple text file. You can actually open it in a simple text editor. It doesn't need to be opened in R Studio, but just R Studio will help you run the R code in R Markdown. And what you will see is that it has a text in it with some sort of formatting information, and it has some R code, right? And the R code is enclosed in this gray box. Yeah. So we'll go through this nicely. So when just now you can press your knit button, and this knit button will make this R Markdown into an HTML document. So you can just press the knit button. And I think for most of you, a browser will open. So a new window will open with your Markdown sheet, right? And you will see that it's a very nicely formatted HTML document. You can also save it. So it is HTML, so you can save it. You can open it in Chrome if you want to try it out. Or any other web browser, you can open it. So, and also you can share it. So another thing is that all the plots, so when you have this default R Markdown file that is provided by RStudio, it shows you how to make some plots, and you will see that a plot has been made. And now this image is part of the HTML file. So it's not separately, it's not an independent file. Yeah, so it's part of this thing. So if you share this HTML document with anybody, they will see the code here. This is the R code. So any R code is in the final output also surrounded by this gray color box. Then the output of the code is directly following the line of code itself, right? So this is the output for this R code, and if any plot was made, it will be part of the HTML. So there's one file for everything. If you do not want your Markdown to open up in a new window, what you can do is, right next to knit, you see this gear, a picture of a gear, which is the setting. So you can click it and you can say preview in viewer plane, and then the Markdown will actually open in a viewer pane here instead of opening in a new window. I like it in this format because then I don't not have to keep shifting between windows. So if you also find this more useful, then you can just change it. I think once you change it, you just need to run it a couple of times until it finally starts appearing here. I think the first time you run it, it doesn't change from window to viewer, but just run it once more. Yeah. So to run R Markdown, what I mean is to knit it, and by knitting, it will run this Markdown code. Right? Cool. So now let's see how to make some changes. So R Markdown has two parts. It has a Markdown part, which is not specific to R, which is just general Markdown, in which we can have a text with formatting, and then it has a part with R. And within the part with R, you can also make comments. So like comments about codes, right? So let's say we just go to this block, which is an R block here. Let's make a comment. And so let's say make show a summary of cars dataset. And then you knit it again. So every time you knit it, the whole Markdown file runs. So it gets converted from a Markdown into an HTML format. And you will see that the change you have made gets added to the Markdown. Right? Mm-hmm. Now this is, you can make comments on the line of code, but you can also make Markdown based comments. So anything that is not in this gray area is a Markdown, right? And now here you can make comments. So if we go back to the R Markdown reference sheet, and that is why it would be handy if you also have it open, in a different maybe window or something. So in this R Markdown reference sheet, we can see what are the different kind of formattings which are possible. So the first thing is a header. So let's say if you want to add a header, so you can add a header in two ways. One thing is you can just do single hashtag, right? That's the first header. So the biggest text, it will be either a single hashtag followed by a space. So the space is important, and then something else. So first header. Or another way to give a header is to just write a piece of text. It can be any text, and in the next line, a lot of equal to signs until the color changes to blue. Yeah. So anytime the color changes to blue, it means that there has been some formatting change that has happened. Yeah. Once it changes to blue, it doesn't matter. So you don't need to keep going. So I think the minimum is 3. So 3 will specify that, yes, the line above it is a header line. So it will be big in its size. But you can make more than 3. So you can make it like that. Yeah. And then, so once you do this, and even if you save this file, so let's say if I save it, nothing will happen. Nothing will change here. So for things to change, you need to again knit. So knit will change this Markdown into HTML file. And now you will see that these two things have appeared and they look exactly the same. So this is one way of giving a header, yeah, a big piece of font. Yeah. Next is we can just keep on going lower and lower. So you can have the first header, second header, third header, and for every lower level of header, you just have to increase the number of hashtags followed by space. So the space after the hashtag is necessary. Yeah. So this will be second header, right? Another way for giving a second header is to have just the minus sign in the line next to where you want your second header. So the equal to sign, equal to 3 equals to means the previous line is the first header. Minus sign means the previous line is second header. So there are only these two special formatting things for the first header and the second header. Rest all is hashtags, rest all headers. So the third header will be 3 hashtags. Then you can keep on going. So 4 headers will be 4. Okay. So I will remove this first and second header. Right? But already you can see how we have a plain text format along with a plain text editor along with the formatting information, and it's all human readable, right? And the final format, once you knit things, the kind of it assembles the text and the format information together. Yeah. So only for the first and second header you have the special formatting rules. Otherwise, you can use a single hashtag for first, 2 hashtag for second, 3, and then so on and so on, right? And then you can, of course, insert any links. So it will be an HTML file or PDF, it doesn't matter. So people can click on something to go to the browser go to a website. So one way is to just include them in this kind of pointed brackets. So anything that is included in a pointed bracket, the text sure is also the link, right? Or another way is to as it says in the R Markdown reference sheet. So we can say that we are using, let's say, R. So if we want to make this text, so let's say we are using R Studio to generate Markdown. So if you want to make this text R Studio into a link, right? So you can look into the reference manual, but the way to do it is to put what you want to become into a link in square brackets, followed by round brackets, which has the link, the name of the information about the link, right? So let us knit it. So now you see that this R Studio text becomes a link, and if you click on it, you will go to this website. So the address of the website is not visible, but it gets linked via this thing, right? So again, you can see that this is just plain text. The formatting information is along with the textual information, right? Everything is human readable. Yeah, so you do not, it's universal, so you do not need a special text editor. You can technically open this RMD file in a simple text editor and change it there. Okay. We can look at a few other formatting rules which are really useful. So one is that you can make a table. Tables are really nice. So to make a table, we just make columns. So each line will be a row, and to make a column, we just have to separate this with straight bars. So this straight bar is the rightmost button underneath delete in Mac window. So it's just this straight line. Then we can just keep making as many columns as we need. Yeah. And to specify that this is the header of the table, we just put dash. So three minimum. Let me just check if I am doing it correctly because Yes, so you have to make it 3 dashes minimum, also followed by the straight line. And then for each column, whatever you want in that column, again separated by a straight line. You don't have to worry about the formatting here. Markdown will do the formatting for you. You can just keep putting it like this, right? Only the straight lines will signify that it's a new column, and a new line signifies that it's a new row. And you can also make it characters. So I'm just typing random words. Yeah. And let's knit this. Right. So when you knit, you see that it converts this into a nice little table in which this line becomes the header, and that is signified by the dashes here, right? And the straight line signifies columns, to separate these things by columns, right? So that's that's the Markdown way, not R Markdown, but just a regular Markdown way of making tables, right? And then there are ways to make lists. So you can make an ordered list by just putting number. So you can say 1, 2. So just put the number followed by a dot, and that means that it will be implemented as uh, a numbered list, right? So if we write this and knit it together, you'll see what the result is. So you get a nice little list of 1, 2, and 3, and there is a tab indentation to just show that these are together, right? You can also make an unordered list. So in that case, single minus sign followed by space means one item, right? So this will be item, uh, then another item. Yeah. And if you want to make a subgroup, uh, just go to a new line and press the tab button and then a plus sign. So that means this is a sub list of the top one. I mean, we are just typing random things here, but essentially it's just to give you an idea of what all Markdown can do. Later on, you just make the report as including what you want, right? And if you, Markdown allows 3 layers of lists in them. So this is the first layer, then the second layer, and then if you go to the next line, again press a tab and then plus. So that becomes the third layer. Now we can knit it and see how it looks, right? And you'll see that it sort of makes this kind of list for you, and each layer is symbolized by a different kind of symbol. Yeah. But you can see that the initial text and the formatting information are all human readable, right? This was the whole concept why Markdown was created. Okay. So this is fine. So this is all about Markdown. I think we covered most of the things related to Markdown. There is a header text, yes, a paragraph. So anytime when you write a piece of text, so let's say if you say a piece of text and you want to change the paragraph, one way is to just put 2 spaces. So normally we press enter to go to the next line. Instead, if you press 2 spaces, so if you make a 2 space and then if you press enter, another paragraph. So 2 spaces symbolizes a change in paragraph. So if we knit it, yeah, we'll see a piece of text and then the next paragraph has some sort of separation between the previous text, right? So just two spaces at the end of a line signify that the next line will be a new paragraph. Yeah. Right. So that is about headers, then lists, tables, and how to include a picture, and links. Yeah, links we already did, and how to include a picture. But one thing that I want to tell you is what is happening behind the scene. So behind the scene, this is your Markdown text, right? This is how we are writing. But what the Markdown software is doing is that it's creating an HTML file from it. So behind the scene, it's changing all of these formatting information that you give as Markdown formatting information into HTML tags, right? So you can, like, this heading followed by equal to's ends up being like this, but in the middle there is this kind of HTML format that it was changed into, and that's how you can get an HTML file at the end. But I think you can appreciate that both the Markdown version and the final text have the most amount of readability, right? And as compared to at least the HTML format, right, which has kind of the least amount of readability. It's very difficult to read this as a piece of text when you compare it to the final version or the Markdown version. I mean, the Markdown version has some information about formatting, but it's still easy to read. Of course, the final version has the best kind of readability, right? But all of these three are universal, so you don't need special software to open these kind of text files, right? And that is what is happening behind the scenes in the Markdown, right? So how to put images, the final thing with Markdown. So of course, if you generate your images using R, then R will generate the image and put it for you. But let's say in case um, you want to include like a picture or something that's not generated by R, just from external source. So the way to include an image is very similar how to include a link, but it's just a little bit different, in which you start with an exclamation mark. The exclamation mark tells that this is going to now include an image. Then, just like here link, you start with a square bracket in which you put what would be shown if the image was not located properly. So here you will say R logo. We'll try to put an R logo here, right? Then round brackets. And after the round brackets, you put the path of the image file with respect to your R Markdown file. So the R Markdown file should be able to locate using that path the image file. Yeah. So I will just try to see where it is in mine. So it's going to be here. So on my computer, this R Markdown sheet is in a folder in which the images are in another folder called Session 6 Presentation. And then the image file name is logo underscore png. And you will see that as soon as you type this, the image actually appears here. Just let me check if it allows. Yes. So instead of typing the name of the folder, you can also press a tab. I did not check it previously. And if you press the tab, it will show you the contents of the folder where this Markdown file is. So you can link your image via this. I think this is better to do rather than typing the name of the folder. So once you press, you select a folder, then you have to press tab again to see all the files inside that folder, right? And this would be the way how to include an image in a Markdown. Then once we knit, you'll see that the image comes here this alternative text. So this is also called alt text. This alternative text doesn't appear. It will only appear if it could not find the image. So I'll just change this, right? So there is no image called our logo one, so it cannot really find. Oh, actually it gave an error and just halted the process, which is weird. I thought that it would finish the process and just put the alt text, right? But it completely halted it. Okay. But this is the way to put a random image, yeah, in our Markdown. Okay, so now this was all about Markdown. There was nothing about R in here. And the thing is that you can I mean, this Markdown is not anything specific to R. For example, GitHub also uses Markdown. So actually, all the pages that you see on GitHub, in the background, we are actually writing them in Markdown. Yeah. So they are rendered as HTML files, but they are all Markdown. And in GitHub, they are just labeled as .md. So MD would be Markdown. Yeah. So a lot of these websites and softwares use Markdown. But now we will come to an R part of it. So the advantage of R Markdown is, of course, you can include your R code in it. And you include your R code in chunks. So these are called R, like chunks of R. And to insert a chunk, what you have to do is to just say insert here, press the insert button and say R. So you can also insert code in other languages. But then R Studio should be able to talk to these other languages. Otherwise, it won't be executed. Yeah. So if you just say R, it will include it. Okay. Excuse me. So this becomes something in which you can write a command, and it will get executed, and whatever will be the result of the command, you will see it, right? Also, these R chunks can be named. So it just will become the name of this chunk, because if there is an error or something, then you will see it. And also, if you see when you knit, it goes step by step. So first it goes through, it says that it sees some ordinary text without R code. Then as soon as it sees an R code, it puts a label sign. And this label cars means that there was a piece of chunk of R code with the name cars. It's optional to name these blocks of codes, but it's good to name them, because in case you find an error or the execution halts, then you will know where the problem was. Whereas if you do not name them, then it's difficult to debug. Yeah. So let's remove all of this, right? And we will start. So let's make a report on coronavirus cases. So we will use the coronavirus package, and this will be our header, the header of the R Markdown. Right? And the first thing, of course, when you want to run anything, is to include some libraries, right? So we will say libraries. So this is just the name of this block of code. Another thing is you can include this block of code by either running insert and R, or by pressing the command option I button in Mac. So yeah, yes. So it is command plus option plus I. For Windows user, I guess you can try out Control Shift I and see if it works. But I'm not really sure what is the shortcut for Windows, but this is the shortcut for Mac. Also for Linux, I'm not really sure, yeah, how to include a block of R code. Yeah. But you can always do it by the insert R button here. So this block of code, we called it libraries. So as always, we just want to include all the libraries, all the packages which we'll need. So I will include tidyverse. If tidyverse you have not installed, you can include dplyr, tibble, tidyr. Okay, I'll also do that actually. So I'll include the individual packages. These are just all the packages that we had used for last sessions. ggplot. We'll try to make a plot, and of course the coronavirus library, right? No, I think that is all. That is all that we need, right? Let me just see. Do we need something else? We don't need read Excel and we don't need read Power. Okay, yeah. Okay, so now you have this block of, okay, so in Windows, Wallace says that it's Control Alt I. Thank you, Wallace. Okay, so for all people who are using Windows and I'm guessing Linux, it will be Control plus Alt plus I to include a block of R code. Yeah. So within this R code, see, unless and until you knit it, sorry, once you knit it, all the code that you have included will run step by step, but you can also run it independently. So to run a single line of code, you can either go here and say run selected line, which is the line which you are on, or you can even say run current chunk, which will run the full block. Yeah. And I typically just like to use the shortcut. So command plus enter is to run a single line, right? So it will run it, and as always, anytime you run a code of R, sorry, it's dplyr. Anytime you run a code of R, you see the output in console, right? So if you shift to console, you will see what happens by running. Nothing will change in your HTML file because to change it, you have to knit the markdown. And to run the whole chunk of code, you can either go here and say run current chunk, or for Mac, it's Command Shift Enter. So it will run the whole chunk. So you can also keep on running chunk by chunk. So this is how we use our Markdown. We actually write the code in this format, and we keep on running it step by step. And once we are done with everything, you just knit it, and it will make an HTML file for you that is shareable. So let's try this right now. So let's include one more line of code. So first we will go to Markdown, and then we'll just write a simple piece of text. We'll say let us look at the summary of the coronavirus dataset. Right? So this is now part of Markdown. We include another chunk of our code, and in this we say glimpse, and we will use the glimpse command from tibble package to look at this data frame. So it will just give us a little bit of preview on what the data set is. So if you run it, then you'll see the output on the console as well as in the R Markdown sheet, right? Okay, let's also add another thing. Let's add head. So head will show us the first 6 values. And if you run this, then you'll see that the output here it changes, right? Because I just ran this single line, so the output changes. But if you run this whole chunk of code, then you'll see that you see 2 outputs. So the first output belongs to the first line of code. The second output belongs to the second line of code, right? I hope that this is visible. Yeah. And also you see the same thing happening in the console. So the console, because everything is running in the R console, so you'll see all the output here also, right? So now let us knit it and let's see what happens. So now once we knit it, we made this line a header. That's because of this kind of formatting, so it becomes big in text. Then there was no kind of formatting here, right? So you just get a normal line text here. Then we have an R code. So because we have R code for running, it makes it surrounds it by a gray box. So that means that this is an R code that was executed and run. And after each line, or actually after any execution, if there is anything that is printed out, it's printed right underneath that line. So because the library dplyr printed out this text, so it just included underneath. So anything that's printed is directly underneath, right? And then we have our own piece of code again here. So again, it's surrounded in a gray box. Then we have another line of text, which is here. Then comes our code again. So after the first line of code, we see its output. So the code is always followed by the output, right? And this makes it much more easier to read, because now you can see what kind of command you ran and what was the result of that command. And everything is together. Everything has a flow in it, right? And then the next command and the output of the next command. Yeah. And this is an HTML file, so you can, of course, open it in a web browser. I think that there is also normally there is a button that says open in browser. I think if I open it in a new window, it will say that. Here, if you press, it asks you whether you want to publish the document. What it means is that there is a repository where people share their Markdown documents. So if they have done some kind of analysis, so it's then open to public. People can read their analysis and everything. So for that you need an account in this repository. So this will not do anything. Right now you can save it as an HTML file and share via email or something, right? But you see, okay, so this is fine. But you see that when we had all of these library files, there was a lot of output that got printed that kind of doesn't look very nice. I mean, it's not really needed, right? We don't, like, the person who will be reading this report, your collaborators, they don't really care about seeing all of this, right? So within this chunk, you can also specify certain parameters that will control what happens to this chunk of R code. So to specify that first, so it has to be R, then space, then the name of the block of code, and then a comma. So after the comma, you can specify all of these different logical, most of them are logical parameters. So logical would mean either you can specify them as true, that means do that, or false, that means do not do that. So two things that you can specify is a message. So if you specify message equals to false, that means do not print any messages. And also warning equal to false. Okay. Now let us knit. And now you see that it has not printed out all of those messages and warnings, right? So it gets rid of it, just makes it a bit more concise. And actually, if you go to this R Markdown, where it shows you how it was knitted, you will actually see that the label means that it was an R code, and the label libraries. So this block of R code came with option, and the two options were that the message should be false and the warning should be false. So you see that this thing was converted here, right? What you can also do is you can say echo equals to false, and that means to not print this piece of code in the final HTML output. So if you do echo equals to false, it doesn't print it at all. It gets executed, but it doesn't get print. Personally, I do not like this, because if there is a piece of code and if it was executed, I feel that it should be part of the report. So I just to let you know that there is such an option, but for me personally, it's okay to not put the messages and the warnings. But if there was a piece of code, then it should be part of the report. Yeah. So but that's just a personal thing. If you don't want it, then it's fine. And another thing is, uh, right at the end of your R Markdown, just go right at the bottom, yeah, and include a block of R code, and just say here session info. So this is going to be the name of this block, and only insert one command here called session info. So this is normally the last R block that many people always keep, and it's a good habit because what the output of session info is, so we'll knit it and you'll see the output. Um, the output of session info is all the information about the current session, and that's very helpful because it allows your code to be reproducible, because it prints out the version of R you were using. So if somebody uses a different version of R, then there is a possibility that the code that they run versus what you run may not match exactly, right? But with these kind of parameters, your code should run exactly the same. Yeah. So this is generally something that is always the last piece of R code to be inserted. Yeah. So it will have the platform and all the information about the current session, and most importantly, it has all the information about the packages that were used in this session along with their version number. And why this is helpful is because if you run an analysis today, and if let's say 1 or 2 years later you either have to run it again or you have to update it, then to get reproducible results, the only possibility is to use the same version of that package, because sometimes package gets updated and then functions change. Some functions are removed, new functions are added, and then later on it's kind of impossible to remember which packages were used of what version. Yeah. So just include this session info as the last chunk of R code in all of your Markdown files. And if you type anything that is executed, don't hide it. You can of course suppress your messages and warnings, so that's fine. No, not a big deal. Yeah. Also, if you want to have a piece of R code that you just want to put there but not get executed, so you just want to show it but not execute it, I think there is an option for that also. And yes, it's eval. So evaluation. So if you put evaluation into false, then that piece of R code is included in the final HTML format, but it's not executed. Yeah. So just in case if you're interested in that. Yeah. So that was just a few things. So now we can go and make some plots. We can make some analysis. So last time we made the trend of total cases with the coronavirus. And now let's make today as just as an example, let's make the ratio of the trend for ratio of dead to recovered people in Belgium. Yeah. So if you were there for the last session, actually no, we can see it here. So this coronavirus database, it has information about the country, right? And then information about the date, and then for each date it has information about the cases for that date, and whether that was a confirmed case or the number of deaths for that day or the numbers of recovery for that day. So let's actually print these things out instead of looking. So we can say countries included. So if you want to look at the countries that are included in this data set, we can use this function called table, which will give us a nice summary on the countries which are present. Yeah. So we go to this data set and then to the column country.region. So when this command is run, it will give us the countries that are part of this data set and how many observations exist for that particular country. Actually, if you worked on this data set more, like a few people emailed, like Barbara, so you would have found that there are some countries with more information than other, and that's because you have information about provinces. So like UK and France, I think have much more information, but we'll see that, right? And we can also see the table for type to see what kind of cases are present, right? So the cases present in the data set, right? So of course in R Markdown, we can make these kind of comments outside as part of Markdown, but what I do is, this is just another personal habit, as Markdown is more about what kind of analysis is being done and so on and so on, or how the flow is, and then within the piece of our code, what exactly is being run as a command, I put that as comment. So there are two levels of comment. So what exactly will this command do is put as an R comment, so that's why it's hashtag, and then as Markdown, it's more about what is going on with the analysis and all that. Yeah, but this is a personal preference, and you can change it. Yeah. So once we knit this, we'll see the output. To see the output, you can also run this command here, and then you'll see the output on the console. So you don't have to knit it, but just to see. Right. So we said echo equals to false. Sorry. So that's why this command is not here. So get summary, and then we knit. So for this command, this is the result, and you'll see that most of the countries have 264 readings, except a few countries like Australia, which has 2,112 readings. Belgium has the normal reading, 264. And I think UK and France also have a lot of readings. And the reason for that is because they also have information on their provinces. So if you want to plot these countries, then you need to remove information about provinces and only take information about the countries, right? But for Belgium, it's fine. It does not have information on their provinces. So we don't need to filter out that information. So first we'll first thing is that we need to make we are only interested in the cases in Belgium, right? So we are not interested in the other cases. So let's subset our data so that it becomes smaller and more manageable. So let's make it. So we'll make a comment in Markdown. So as we are only interested in Belgium, we will subset the data. And then here we call this block of our code as subset, so just the name of this code, and we'll just say using filter to select Belgium. So we'll use the dplyr function, right? So we'll start with our data, then we'll filter it, and we want to filter it for the country and region, and it should be equal to Belgium, right? So we are only selecting one country. right? So filter will select the rows. So the rows are the observations. So it will select the rows for which country, the value of country dot, or dot region, the column, the name of this column equals Belgium. And we can further filter it. Although in case of Belgium, it's not needed, but just if you want to use it for other countries. So if you want to remove the information on province, right? So you see that the province dot state, if there is no information, then it's blank. And if there is information, then it has, I mean, it's not blank, like it will have the name of the province, right? So if we say to select province dot state equal to blank, right? So this will remove any and all information related to any specific province and just focus on the full country. We don't need to do this for Belgium because it does not have this information, but for other countries like UK, Australia, France, you would need this. Yeah. And then this is it. We have subset our data set and we'll save it in a new variable. So to save, we don't use the pipe function anymore. We use the assignment operator and we'll just name it like this. Right? So instead of knitting, we just run it. And because we ran it, you will see that now you get a new variable in your environment, right? Because we ran it. And now this variable is a data set with only 264 observations. It has 7 different features or attributes. And the country is Belgium. And to actually see it, we can also go to the console and just say view with a capital W. And then we can see this complete data set here. And you see that it has only information about Belgium. Right? And then it has the date and the cases and the type. So whether it was a confirmed case, the number of deaths, or the number of recovery. Yeah, once it refresh, we can see it, right? Or the number of recovered on that day, right? So now we need to, because our whole goal was to plot the ratio of death to recovered along days in Belgium, right? So first we can let's just plot the cases and then we will come to the ratio, right? Because for ratio we'll have to do a data manipulation, right, to get the ratio. But first we can just plot the trend. So let's say we make this a header of the 4th level. So plot the cases of corona in Belgium, right? So if we want to make a plot, we'll make another R chunk, right? And then we'll say plot trend. And that's just the name of this R chunk, right? So because we want to plot something, we'll do it by ggplot, right? And so for ggplot, as we discussed in the last session, we need 4 independent elements or 4 independent layers. The first is the data, right? So for ggplot, you need data. You need mappings, which are also called aesthetics. So which are mostly what is on the x-axis and what is on the y-axis. Right? And then you need a geometry. And the geometry will define what kind of plot. Right? So the first step for a ggplot is you have to initiate a ggplot object. Right? And we just call it p.belgium. So this will be our ggplot object, p.belgium. Or you can name it whatever you want. I mean, the name doesn't matter. Right? And to initiate this object, we call the function ggplot. So this will initiate it. And then here we specify our data and mapping. So for our data, we want the subsetted data, the smaller data set. So Belgium.corona. And then for our mapping, so the mapping, we want x-axis, what will be on the x-axis and what will be on the y-axis. And this information is included in as mapping equals to AES. So what are the aesthetics of your mapping, right? And here we define x equal to cases and y equal to date. Okay? So this will initiate a ggplot object. And let's plot it out. Let's plot this object. So we have only initiated it, right? We have not yet given it a geometry, but let's see what happens. So let's see now if we knit, what happens. Right? So the knitting is finished. So let us go down, and you will see that all you see is an empty plot. You do see x-axis and you do see y-axis, and that's because we have defined what will be on the x and y-axis. But you do not see any kind of plot, and that's because we have not yet defined what kind of geometry we need, right? So that information is missing, right? But you see how the Markdown has also converted it into an HTML file. So this thing we gave as a fourth heading, so it's bigger than a normal piece of text, and then it executes this line of code. And because we just put this here, so when you call a ggplot object by its name, it makes the plot, right? And so you see the plot right after this. So to actually make the plot, we have to add another layer or a geometry layer. And we can add a geometry underscore line, right, to see it as a line. So I'm going to run this, and you'll see if you go to this plot, you'll see it here, that what you get is very, very weird, right? And that's because for every date, sorry, I made a mistake. X should be date and Y should be cases. I mean, it's okay to have it this way also, but just better to have on the x-axis the date and on the y-axis the cases, right? So let's just run it again. So you see it becomes this kind of weird shape, and that's because the cases are a mix of three types, right? So they are either confirmed cases, they are death, or they are recovered, right? And if you want these each individual line to specify a kind of case, right, then we have to separate them. So we have to group them together, right? Otherwise here right now this is a mix of all three kinds of cases, right? So in that way we can actually group them together by another aesthetic, right? Because we want to group our data, so that's part of our aesthetics. And we can say color equal to type, right? So now what it will do, what ggplot will do, is that it will go to the column which is named type. It will see what are the different types. It will not only color them together, but it will also group them together, and it will make it part of the aesthetic of a line geometry. Yeah, does that? I hope that made sense. Yeah. So this way we can split our data into different types, right? So now when we run it, so now you see the three different types of cases. Yeah. But you see that there is a lot of ups and downs, which is expected, right? Because there will be day-to-day variability, and from one day to another, there will be a lot of shifts, right? So to smoothen it out, there is a nice geometry, and you can also check this out in the cheat sheet for ggplot, because in the cheat sheet for ggplot, for every geometry they have given a nice small little plot in which they show what kind of plot you will get. So you can use a smoothen plot, and this smoothen plot does takes a line plot but just averages it out, so it shows you the trend. You could do that with facet also, Adria, that is correct, but then you get 3 plots. But yes, let us do it. So what Adria said was that we could also separate the types with the facet, which is absolutely correct. So let's do it. So we can make a line plot, right? And then we can say facet. So facet underscore grid with type. So what this does, it looks at this column type and then groups the data together and draws a different plot for each grouping, right? Which is different than this plot in which all the different groups are plotted together. So let's run this command and you'll see that it makes 3 different plots, right? So that is the whole facet command. Yeah, it's completely fine to do it like this, but if you just want it to be combined, then you make it into an aesthetic, right? And let's try out this smooth geometry in which we all combine all the plots, so we make the aesthetic. Yeah, and then it shows you the trend line, and it actually uses a regression called Lewis, so you can go and look into it, what kind of regression it is. You can actually also I think specify the kind of regression you want to use, but by default it is this. So it also not only shows you the trend, but it also shows you the confidence interval, right? Yeah. So this is fine. We are now able to see some trends. Another thing is that somebody asked last time, what if we want to manually specify the colors? So these are the default colors that ggplot allows, but what if I want to manually change the colors? And you will also see this in the ggplot cheat sheet. So to change it, we just have to define scale. So scaling function defines these kind of things. So because each group is a different scale, let's say, yeah. So if we say scale underscore color underscore manual, right? So this means that the scaling for the color that you are using, I'm going to define it manually. So this just becomes another layer, and here you can specify what your values are as a vector. So let's just say that we want red. Well, it has already used red, green, and blue, so I'm just going to use some different color: gray, violet, orange. Yeah, just 3 random colors. There is also in the R cheat sheet folder, there is also a PDF on R colors where you will see all the colors which are present in R and how to define it. So we'll just run this line. So remember that we are not knitting it yet, right? So nothing is changing in the HTML. We'll knit it once we have all the data analysis done and complete and we are happy with it. Yeah. And now you see that it manually changed the color. So the first group gets gray, the second group gets violet, the third groups get orange. One thing very important is when you, of course, give manual colors, the number of colors that you give has to match the number of groups, right? If you just leave it, then ggplot will automatically define the different number of colors, but in this case, then you have to specify, right? So I will leave it like this, and we will say, we will comment on this line, manual coloring. And this is separate plot based on groups. And we'll just write down the original command here. So this is combined plot. So let's knit it, and now let's see how the HTML file is looking. So you can see that in this our block called plot trend, it took a little bit of time to run, right? It was kind of stuck there for a little time. So this also shows you which kind of blocks are taking a lot of time and all that kind of thing. Yeah. But if we go down, so you'll see that after each command, it has put the plot, right? So you run a command, whatever is the output, it gets put. So here is the initiation of the ggplot. Then we make the first plot. The result of the plot is right out after it. Yeah. Then we put the second kind of plot. The result of the plot is right after it. So it's really nice because once you share this HTML, people can see the code and the result directly, right? And then in Markdown, you can make the comments on what is going on with your code. Yeah. So this is it, right? Now we come to our original question. We want the ratio of dead to recovered, right? So we will obtain the ratio, or not obtain, but calculate the ratio. So how do we calculate the ratio? The thing is that right now the data is tidy, right? If we view the data, let's say we view our data, and our data is in tidy format, which is how ggplot and R likes it. So all of the cases are in a single line, and then the type of case is in another column, right? Now, if we want to take a ratio for a single date between a confirmed case versus some other kind of case, it's sort of difficult, right? Because it's not very easy to manipulate it. And actually, this is one instance where having a wide format will really help. So what if we make three individual columns with the title confirmed, dead, or recovered, so the type of the case, and then in that column you have the value of the case, right? Because if we make these three independent columns, then we can easily divide them, right? So that would be a wide format. Yeah, I hope that's a bit, I mean, we'll do it, but I hope that it makes intuitive sense of what we are trying to do, how it is, what's the algorithm to get the ratio, right? Because right now, if you want to make the ratio of this number versus the number of recovered for this date, we have to search for it and then make the ratio, right? But just imagine if you had three columns, one that had the number of confirmed cases for that day, another column that had the number of dead, and another column the number of recovered cases. Then once you have these three columns right next to each other, you can easily make any sort of manipulation between them, right? And that is converting this data from a long format to a wide format, right? So in the wide format, we will subset the type and make a new column, right? So it will be opposite of what we did in the previous two sessions, in which we were combining the data. This time we will spread out our data. So we'll spread out our data depending on the type of case it was. So a single column for each kind of case, right? So we'll spread it out. So we will use this function spread, right? So this is going to spread out your data, right? And the key will be the column that we want to spread, that we want to push out. So it will be the type, right? And the value that we want to push out, that we want to spread, that we want to separate into columns, right, is going to be the case. Let me just do this, and now you will see what happened. So now we get 3 columns. One column name is confirmed, one column name is death, and one column name is recovered, right? So the values in the column type got spread out. So for each group in that column, we got a new column made, right? And the information within this column comes from the number of cases, right? So now we have a date, and for that date we have the number of confirmed, the number of death, and the number of recovered in 3 columns next to each other, right? So this is a wide format, but in this case the wide format is really helpful because now we just have to divide one number from another and we will get the ratio, right? So the long format is good, but for many of the manipulations you should be able to shift between one format to another. It depends on the kind of question you have, right? So we will make our data set wide, in which we will spread the data based on of type. Right? So this is the first thing we do. Of course, we want to save it. So we will save it as belgium.wide, just to specify that it's a wide data format, right? And we just run it again. So now we get a new variable called belgium.wide. And you will see that the number of observations in this variable is less. It's actually going to be 1/3. That's because there were 3 groups, right? But it has 3 independent columns, right? And now we just take the ratio very simply. So if we want to take the ratio, we want to manipulate the columns, and the dplyr way of doing that is to use the mutate function. So the mutate function can make manipulations on the column, right? So ratio of dead to recovered. Okay. So belgium.wide, and we say mutate. Now ratio dead recover. This will be the name of the new column, right? So you can name it anyway. Maybe it's too long a name, but we can just say dead over recovered. Now you see that both of them have 0 in them, right? So if we do this, we will get a lot of infinities and a lot of non-numbers. So what we will do is just put a round bracket along both the variables, and we'll add a very small number to them. So we'll add like 0.1 to them. This will make all the zeros non-zero, and this way we will avoid infinities and not random numbers. Yeah, just make sure that you actually put this plus 0.1 in a bracket, otherwise it will first make the division, and then to the division it will add 0.1. That's because division will take preference, and then you will again end up with infinities. So put round brackets around recovered plus 0.1, and then also round brackets around dead plus 0.1, and separate them by a division sign, right? And this thing we'll put in a new variable, let's say final. It's not dead, it's death. Okay. So now let's see what is belgium.final. So we can say head. So you see that the ratio is 0 upon 0, it comes out as 1. because we are essentially in this case dividing 0.1 by 0.1. We're not dividing 0 by 0. And if you go to later numbers, so we'll see also the tail. So the tail will give us the final at the end. There you will see that, okay, then we have some kind of ratio, right? And now we finally make the plot that we all were interested in making. So we plot the trend of ratio. So here double hashtag means, because it's in the R Markdown, because it's in the Markdown area, it means that it's going to be a header, bold text that will become a header. So instead of making it a header level number 2, which is a bit too much, we can make it a header level number 4. Yeah. Then we include a chunk piece, and then we say ratio. So we want to plot the ratio from this data. So we'll again have to initialize a new ggplot object, right? So plot from Belgium.final. So p.final, let's say. So this will be the name of the ggplot object. It will be ggplot. So we initialize our ggplot. Data is Belgium.final. So just one thing to say, if you are interested to using the pipe function even for ggplot, if you like it, then you can also write this as this. Yeah. So this means exactly, these two commands are exactly the same. So this pipe will mean that put this as the argument of this function, and then whatever is the result, put it in p.final, or this is the other way of writing it. So these both are exactly the same. It depends on whether you like the pipe way of writing it or the direct way. And then we have to specify our mapping, right? What will be on the x-axis and what will be on the y-axis. So on the x-axis we will have our date, and on the y-axis we will have ratio dead recover. Right? And then when we call our ggplot object, nothing will be plotted. So we need to specify our geometry. And in this case, there is no 3 groups, right? We just have a single number. There is no grouping, nothing. So we don't need to specify any other aesthetics. But this should make our final plot. So here, as you see, we get our ratio. And you see that initially in the early days, it's kind of 0. So there is not much difference, which makes sense because in early days, there were not many cases. But then you see an increase in the number of deaths as compared to recovery. And that's because the recovery period is 2 to 3 weeks. So if a lot of patients go into the hospital, you initially see a lot more deaths than recovery. Recovery always has a lag phase because it takes 2 to 3 weeks to recover. And then now finally, the number of recovered has, on a daily basis, is more than the number of people who are dying. So that's actually a good trend for now, that it's coming down. Yeah. And that was all that I wanted to cover for R Markdown and data analysis. And I hope that um, uh, this exercise of getting this ratio and when is the wide format more useful and when is the long format more useful helped. Just think about it. Think about the question and think about what kind of operation is needed. And sometimes the wide format becomes more useful than the long format. Right? So finally, we will knit it, and this will make our HTML file. So you just have to press the knit button. And here we get our final HTML file, right? Where you see all the code that was executed. You see each and every command, and just after the command, you see what kind of output did it give, right? So this was the final output which happened with this command. Yeah. So just a couple more things about R Markdown that I wanted to cover. So the first thing is the date here. When you first make an R Markdown file, the date actually comes here, comes written here, and that's the date. But generally, you will keep on working on your R Markdown file, and you will keep on updating it. And every time you update it, this date will not change, right? Because it is how it is. So there is a function that will allow you to do that, and I'll just have to copy paste it because it's just something that you have to remember. You can search for it on Google if you don't want to see right now. I mean, if you don't want to see it from the screen and copy it from here, but this is a command that you just have to put here. So it says single apostrophe r dot format sys dot time. Then so this will give the current system time, and this is what how the format of the output will be. So this means day, this means month, and this means year. So just output the date in this kind of format. So I mean, you can just Google it, yeah, but this is just something that I like to change every time I make a new R Markdown file. And that is because if we knit it, it will show the same date because we executed it on the same date. But now if we knit it tomorrow, then the HTML file will have the date when it was last knit. Yeah, so the date keeps on getting updated. Then you do not have to update it manually. So right now it will be 20th April. Yeah, and you can play around with this format to change the format of date. So if you don't want it like this, or let's say if we want to remove the date, you just want the month, right? So we remove this. Let's knit it again. Yeah. Just Google it. Just Google specify date R Markdown, and you will get this command. Yeah. So now you see that the date, the day got removed, and you just have the month. Yeah. So this is just something that I like to change. Another thing that you might want to change is if you want to put a table of content. So for that, also I will copy paste. You just have to change your output here. It will still remain in HTML format output, but I'll explain now what happens. So these kind of tabs are really important here. So if the tabbing is not correct, it kind of gives an error. So your output, and then on the next line in HTML document. So initially it was like this, output just HTML document, but now output colon HTML document, then another colon. Yeah. And if you don't want to type it right now, don't worry about it, because we'll upload this file onto the Git. So you can always just get this file from the Git repository for the course and just copy paste it at that time. So it's okay. Yeah. And then it says, so then you come to the next line and then put another tab, then table of content equal true. So that will put a table of content, and table of content depth. So that means what depth of headers should be part of table of content, right? So for example, this is header 1, so it will be part of table of content. This is header 2, so it will also be part, but this is header 4, so it will not be part. So the depth specify what depth of headers should be there. And then table of content float will mean that it will come. So if we remove this, let's just knit it and we'll see what the difference is. This is just something, I mean, this is how it is. So better to just copy paste it. Yeah. And once you have it, you can do you can just keep repeating it. So if you just leave it like this, then you get your table of contents here. Yeah. But if you put table of contents float, then what you get it in the sidebar or on the top, and they look different. And to me, it looks a bit better. So we'll knit it and then see how these parameters change the HTML format. Yeah. So now you get it here, right? And you can either click on it, and it will expand for each header, right? And then when you click on it, you go there. So it just separates. So this TOC float and TOC collapse falls, it separates the table of content in a different place, which just sometimes looks better. But if you want table of content to be after the heading, then you just put it there, right? So these are just a couple of parameters in the heading, which you can change, which kind of, I think, improves the final format. Just make the date so that it gets updated automatically, and then add a table of content. Yeah. But that is about it, right? So that is everything about R Markdown, and I find it a better way of writing R code. So personally, I would suggest to only write things as Markdown. Uh, it's no different than writing it as an R code, but I think it's a bit more easier to reproduce and has more notes, so easier to remember what you were doing. Yeah. Okay. That is about R Markdown. We have 15 more minutes, and I think that's perfect because I just wanted to give an introduction on Shiny. We won't go into much detail, but if anybody has any questions on Markdown, then just ask. And then we can either try to answer that question in 15 minutes or give a very short introduction to Shiny. Okay. Okay. Cool. So next thing is, I think one of my favorite things in R, to be honest, it's to make interactive websites. So right now, the kind of HTML documents that you generated were static, right? You couldn't really interact with them. Although in Markdown also you can technically include some sort of interaction. For example, you can include a plot in which you have a zoom function, but for that you need to include JavaScript and all that. But if people who are interested, the package is called HTML widgets. So HTML widget package allows you to put some sort of interaction in your plots in Markdown. It will allow users to zoom and do all these kind of things. Yeah. But it's still a very limited kind of interaction. But really, to make really interactive websites, the way is to use R Shiny, which was made for making interactive websites. Yeah. And it's a library of functions that define how the website will look and what sort of interaction will the user be allowed to have, right? So we should just start and make the first kind of R Shiny thing. So to make a R Shiny app, go to File, New File, and then we select R Shiny Web App. And once you select this, a pop-up will open like this, like what I have here, and just give it an application name, any name, first app or anything, and say that you want it to be a single file, and create it within a directory. It doesn't matter which where it is created. Yeah. But just fill out these things and then just say okay to make your first app. Yeah. Right. So I'm going to do the same thing. Shiny app name will be 6. Okay. And once you make this app, you will see that it actually comes with a predefined application, right? So you can already it already comes with an app that you can actually run to see what happens. So let us just run the app. So if you run the app, what you will see is that your console becomes busy. That's because it's actually the difference between Markdown and Shiny is that Shiny is going to continuously keep running R in the background. And so right now your R console has actually become the server for this Shiny app. So if you do anything in the Shiny app, uh, it will execute it in R. So there is no more execution with Markdown, but in Shiny there is continuous execution, right? So and I think if you run your app, if you press this button, run app, a new window pops up. To stop the app, you just have to press the stop button here, and it stops the app. And if you do not want a new window to pop up, just press on this arrow button here next to run app, and you can select run in the viewer pane. And if you select that, then you get the app here in the viewer pane. Again, you just have to run it a couple of times until it finally appears in the viewer pane, right? And now this is also technically an HTML document. Although you have to publish it, it is technically an HTML rendered document, but in the background it's running R. So you cannot just share it as an HTML document because it has to be linked to an R server, but you can publish it. And for this there is a repository where you get 5 free apps to publish. The bandwidth is little bit less, but you can surely publish it. So if you make an R app, a Shiny app for your data, which you send to a publication, you can actually make an app and just put it on this public repository, which has actually become very common for a lot of single cell data sets. So a lot of single cell data sets actually are shared via this Shiny app, right? So what is in this Shiny app? If you are running it, then you will see that it has a slider, right, which allows you to move it. And when you move this slider, you will see that the plot changes. So I hope that when you made a new Shiny app, this default application came up, because I know that in old versions of R, this was not the case. There was no default application. But if you cannot see it, then I will also show you how to get the default one. Yeah. Juliana. Okay. We can figure it out, Juliana, later. Yeah. I can talk to, we can discuss this. Yeah. Okay. So right. So now we'll see at what is happening in this Shiny app, right? What is going on? How is it possible that when we change the slider bar, our plot actually changes? So what are the parts of a Shiny app, right? So the app has essentially two parts. One is the server, which is running your R code in the background, right? So we always need this kind of server. And when you run a Shiny app on an RStudio, so in the local environment, actually it just uses your R as a server. So I mean, you do not need the internet to run the app on your computer, because it just makes your R as into a server. Yeah. So what the server does is it listens to whatever is happening in the app. So whatever is changing, whatever parameters you are changing, so it listens to it, and then based on your change, it will react. So it's a reactive server, and this reaction, it then sends back to the app, which can be plotting or it can be anything, right? So it's a back and forth between the server and the HTML web page that has been created. Yeah. And this HTML web page that you create is called user interface or UI. for short. So these are the two components of all Shiny apps. So you have the user interface and you have the server. And these are also the two components that you need to define. So in the user interface, you will define how your website will look. So what will be the kind of inputs that you will allow, the kind of outputs that you have to give, the name of the name that's printed here, and all of these kind of things, right? So this will just have the layout of your website. And on the server side, you will have what kind of computations will happen based on your input and what sort of output will be given for plotting or for viewing, right? So the server will have all the computations, all the let's say data analysis or plotting or all these kind of things, and the user interface will only have information about the layout. Yeah, so these will be the two components, and they talk to each other. And how they talk to each other, uh, well, let's see, maybe we leave it for the next session. Yeah, but once you figure out how they talk to each other, then writing these kind of apps is very simple. You just define your user interface and then you make it talk to the server, right? And both of these things are part of this one file here. So when you created the Shiny app, you got both of these things made. So you got your user interface made here, right? So library Shiny will tell that you want to use the functions in Shiny. So the user interface is defined here, and then the server is defined here. So these are defined as two functions. So I think in a couple of sessions before, we discussed how to define a function, and these are the two. The server is a custom function that you have to define for the server to function, and the two parameters of them are input and output. So what kind of input it will take and the output that it will give. This remains same always. So it always remains same. So you don't have to change anything here. Yeah, only thing you have to change is what is inside. So what kind of computation will happen, that you have to change. This is always the same, right? And then you have your user interface. So your user interface will be how your website looks, right? And typically the user interface is a theme. Yeah, and this fluid page is a theme that comes as default with Shiny. There are other themes also that you can use, but these themes provide you looks. So the thing is, R Shiny is very powerful in making interactive websites, but it's restricted because you can only do a certain amount of things. Just like with Markdown, you could only do a certain amount of formatting. Here also, you can only make certain amount of websites or certain kinds of websites. So you do not have unlimited freedom to do that. I mean, for that, you will have to code in JavaScript if you want that unlimited freedom. But here, you have limited freedom, right? So this theme called Fluid Page, we'll just focus on this theme. And what this theme allows you to do is that it gives you a web page that has 3 parts. That's it, as simple as that. It just has 3 parts, and you have to define what goes in each of these 3 parts. So the first part is the title, right? So this is how to define the 3 parts. So you have your user interface, which is a fluid page, which is the theme, which is the kind of theme. I think maybe this is a little bit small, so I'll just zoom in a little bit more. Let's see if it is possible to zoom in. No, it remains small, yeah. But we can also look at it here. So the 3 parts of the website are your title. So what will be on the title? Then a sidebar layout, which will include what will happen in your sidebar. So what will be on the side, and generally your sidebar is your inputs, so user inputs. So in this case, the number of bins is the sidebar panel. Yeah, so there are 3 panels in your website. Yeah, in this kind of theme, in the theme of Fluid Page, 3 panels: the title panel, which will be the title of the website; the sidebar panel, which will have inputs from the user; and then finally the main panel. And the main panel has your outputs or your plots most of the time. Yeah. So this is the 3 components of this theme Fluid Page. Yeah. So you have the title, the sidebar, and the mail panel, and you always define them in this way. So this is kind of set in stone. You cannot really change how you define these things, but you can change what is inside of these panels. So you can change what is your title, you can change what is in the sidebar, so how you want to take the input from the users, and you can change what you want to plot in the main panel. So you cannot really change these panels or the location of these panels. I mean, you can change it, but in the most default format. With Fluid Page theme, you cannot change them, but you can change what will be part of them. So let's try to change them. So let's try to include one more input from the user. Yeah. So right now the input from the user is a sliding bar, and you have all of these options as inputs. So you can get inputs from users with all of these different formats. So you can get a numerical input in which the user selects a number. You can get a text input, which is any kind of text. Yeah. You can give sliders which have a range, either the user either selects a single number or a range of numbers. You can get a selection box in which you give certain options and the user can select those options, or the user can select the options based on radio buttons, and so on and so on, right? You can also give a file input in which the user uploads a file, right? So all of these things are possible as inputs. So let's do that. So as we said, with the Shiny app, we have these 3 panels. So the title panel, the sidebar panel, and the main panel, right? The title panel just has the title of the website. So let's change it. So we will change it to my first Shiny app. And then when we reload the app, the title of the website changes. Right? So this is the title area. Yeah, you can only have a single line or a sentence. Better to make it short, because if it's too long, then it messes it up, right? If you write a full paragraph, then it messes it up. You can write a full paragraph, just make it in the main panel. So make it as text, right? Just the title is better to be short. Yeah. Then next is the sidebar panel, where you take input from the user. So here there is one kind of input, which is the slider input, right? So this is part of here. So this slider input, and for each of this input format, there is a function that will make this kind of input for you. So you do not have to define it. You just say this function and it will make it. So if you want to make an action button, the function is action button, right? Radio button, and so on and so on. So let's make a text input. Yeah. So the function for so if you want to add another input, all you have to do is to separate the first one with a comma. So comma will mean now the next value. Then go here, and we will add a new function called text input. Yeah. So this will add a text input to this sidebar panel. Right? So within this sidebar panel, you can see the round brackets. Now we have 2 kinds of inputs. One is a slider input, then comma, to separate it from any other input, then we have a text input, right? And within the text input, we have to give it few arguments. So we have to give it the ID. So because the ID is what the server will use to understand that this input comes from this particular uh, this particular feature, this particular widget, right? So every widget or every input has to give an ID, and that is what the server uses to recognize what is happening where. So this ID cannot be repeated. It's something specific for every input. So let's say user uh, type or user text. Yeah, let's just call it a user text. Yeah. So this is the first attribute. The next attribute is label. So label is if you want to write any piece of text on top of this input, I think. So if you want to say like, please input some text or please type something. So this will be written on top. Next is value. So value would be what do you want to be default. So let's just say we want ABC to be default. So now, yeah, right? So see, what did we do? We have our 3 panels, which will define how our final website will be created. We have the title panel, the sidebar panel, which is for inputs, and then the main panel, which is for output. Within the sidebar panel, they already gave us one kind of input. So we put a comma because we want to add another kind of input. And then we said that we want to add a text input with these kind of attributes. Now let us reload the app, and you will see that a text input has appeared. A text box has appeared. The label is please type something, and the value, the default value is ABC, and you can type anything here. Right? The thing is that because of your typing, nothing is happening because we have not yet written a server function that will do something with this input. Of course, by changing this, the plot is changing because there is a server function that is listening to this change and then plotting something or making some kind of changes. How do we go from an input to a change? That is the only thing that we need to learn. And once you learn this, then it's pretty simple, right? Because then you have a selection of inputs, and most of the time your outputs are plots, right? And I think this we can leave for the next session. So we'll start from here for the next session on Shiny app. But I think this kind of introduction will help us finish it in 2 hours for the next session, because it takes a little bit of time to understand, to really get the hang of how to go from an input to the server and then back to the main panel. So what will happen is your input will go to the server. The server will do some kind of computation, and it will send a result back to the main panel where you will plot your output. So I think if people are interested to see how to do it, you can. I'll quickly do it and then go over it very slowly. Right. So the first thing is that within the output we have to define that it has to be a text output, right? And we have to give this text output a name. So user, which is different than the input, right? So let's say text out, right? And of course separated from this comma by this output with a comma. So this means that this is a plot output where a plot will be made. This is a text output where some text will be written. And the name of this text output is text out. And now all we want to do is to connect this output, which is named text out, with this input, which is named user text. And that we do very, very simply in the server, because the server is where all the computations happen. And this is the way to do it. So we call it output $. So that means I'm going to define the output for this kind of output. So for text out. And then it just is render. So just like here, it's render plot. It's a render text. So render text means just type a piece of text, right? I'm going to go through this a bit quickly because it's just for people who are interested in this 3 or 4 days to work with R Shiny by themselves. But we'll go through this very, very slowly. And we are going to return input $user text. So the ID of the input. Right. So now we have connected an input which had the ID user text to an output that had the ID text out. Right. So here is the output connected to our input. Right. And now when we reload the app, you see whatever is typed here gets printed right at the bottom where we called the output. Now let's change it. As soon as we change, what is changing is the text with the ID user text, right? So this is changing. Now, because this is changing, the server will react to a change in the input in the ID user text. And this reaction will trigger this function, will trigger this computation, which prints a piece of text. And this triggering will change an output by the ID text out. And this output is going to be printed in the main panel. So let's see if it did. And you see it changes it. So as soon as we do something, it gets printed here. Right. So this was pretty fast. I mean, I think if you want to try it out, play around with it, then please do. Right. But we'll go through this. We'll have 2 hours next time. This will be the last thing that we do. But this is it. This is how you make Shiny apps. You have to define an input with an ID. You have to define an output with an ID, and then connect these two in the server. And that's it. That's all there is to Shiny app. The placement of these panels and does not change. So all Shiny apps with a certain theme look exactly the same. We do not have the freedom to do that. We only have the freedom to change what's inside and what kind of computation happens. Yeah, but we'll go through them slowly for the next time. Yeah, okay. So for this session, that is it. So thank you, and then see you for the last one on Thursday at the same time. Yeah, and if any people have some problem or issues with R Markdown, just let me know. And for R Shiny, we will go slowly for the next time. Yeah. Okay. So thank you and bye bye.